We're going to talk about cover-ups today. If there's one topic that tends to dumbfound people when they come into a tattoo shop, I would say that number one would be cover-ups. And we are going to cover in this video sort of the average cover-up situation. If you are trying to cover a sleeve, you're going to need a much more technical discussion, and we may eventually do that. But for right now, this is kind of just the basic situation. What the average person is probably trying to cover, and the average skill set that you're going to have access to as far as an artist within driving distance of where you live. The first thing that I do want to stress is that cover up experiences are entirely unique. What you have already is unique to you. The experience of the artist coming into this is going to be totally unique. The ideas that they have when they look at your tattoo are also going to be very unique. So you are going to have a totally different experience if you are taking your cover up to different artists. We do not learn in a uniform fashion when we are apprenticing about cover ups. It is really just whatever happens to come into the shop at that time. That's what we can observe and learn from. And sometimes those are complicated, sometimes they're simple, often there's a mix of it. But how every artist gets to this point of, meeting with you and discussing the cover up is unique to them. And so definitely consider getting second and third opinions when you are going through the cover up process, just because sometimes I look at a cover up, an existing tattoo, and I see options, two or three options for covering up that I think are viable. But I can ask, a fellow artist at the shop to come look at that, and they may come up with two or three other options that were not even on my radar that would work just as well, possibly better. So keep that in mind that every artist is going to see your existing tattoo in a different way. That is a process of like visual puzzle solving. And we all approach puzzles and things in different ways. So, point number one that I want you to keep in mind when you're going through the cover up process is that the idea that you have for your own cover up may not work. It's not that we can't potentially incorporate aspects of that, but just keep an open mind about that because sometimes, a person may come in with a cover up that is quite dark and has a lot of shading and a lot of black in it, and often they will bring in, a brightly colored pastel image, maybe some really delicate flowers, and that's not going to work. Think of it in the same way as if you like have a piece of paper and you've got a black Sharpie and you mark on that, and then you take like crayons or colored pencils and you start coloring over that black Sharpie. That that's not going to disguise that black at all. It may, lighten a shade or two, but that's that's a whole other complicated issue. What works best for a cover up is to disguise it, and sometimes you guys just don't have enough experience with that kind of puzzle solving, and your artist will. That's what they're there for, is to provide input and thoughts and feedback on this process. So have an open mind when you go in, but also I want to stress, don't be like too open. If I have worked with you for a few years, I can pick up on your style, and generally, if I have to make a recommendation for a cover up, I can come up with something that suits you if I have worked with you a lot before. But if it's the first time that you're meeting an artist, they don't know you. It's very, very hard to make suggestions on what you should get tattooed if I don't know, the aesthetic that you prefer, the color palette that you like, your interests. I could give you some, you know, UFO abduction crazy space scene for your cover up, and maybe you hate that, but that you asked me for my opinion and what I thought would work, and that would work. So keep an open mind, but also my recommendation would be to maybe have a list of just things that you are very interested in when you go into the shop. Your favorite movies, your favorite books, topics, sports teams, things like that. So if I meet someone and they're like, I really don't know what I want to get, but I'm a huge baseball fan. I'm like, oh, okay, what's your team? Maybe that logo would work. Maybe some perspective of like a player. I don't know. We can work with your interests sometimes to create visuals that maybe you are never going to find on the internet. And maybe you're going to be much happier with that because we don't want you to move into a situation where we cover up a tattoo and then 6 months later you're like, I hated that idea. I mean, I hated the original tattoo and then I covered it and that was good that it was gone, but now I hate this one. It gets way more complicated. I have seen cover ups of cover ups and you don't want to be in that position. So, um, have some ideas, but keep an open mind. Also, keep an open mind as far as your color palette because there have been occasions when black and gray works well for cover ups, but you do have a lot more flexibility in achieving a natural look when you have color options. There may be some spaces where, you could only use black, but maybe that's flexible enough that I can pull in some dark purples or some dark greens, and we didn't have to just have this huge black, you know, bunch of chaos going on because we want it to look natural. We don't want people to look at this and say, that was definitely a cover up. Right? So be open on colors. Um, it just gives you more options and more flexibility in getting a much more natural look that is not going to be obvious that it's a cover up. Um, Also, be open to the fact that this could take multiple sessions and it could end up bigger than you were hoping. So, say that you have a tattoo about the size, but what is really set in your heart for this cover up is a mermaid. That would be a difficult cover up. There's a little bit of flexibility with some of the scales of the tail, but as far as like the torso, there's a lot of flesh tones that don't work well for cover ups. But if you perched that mermaid on top of some rocks and you had some ocean spray and whatnot, that could work. That could work very well because those rocks would provide a lot of good texture for disguising the existing tattoo. So, you've got your existing one, but that's going to have to be in the rock section. So then you have your mermaid perched atop that, probably. So you can see how to make something work and to disguise it really well, it could easily become a much larger tattoo. Be open to that because sometimes I'm afraid that when we start suggesting things like that to people, that they feel like we're just trying to get money out of them. And that's not the case. I mean, there may be some artist out there doing that, but that's going to be like 0.5% of artists that you talk to. Most of the time, we just really want it to turn out the best that it possibly can. And more often than not, with a cover up, you are going to have to go larger than the original tattoo. Um, and yeah, it may take multiple sessions. So if you can get it done in one session, I personally do like to have my client either stop by the shop after a few weeks or send me a photo just to make sure that everything was disguised as well as possible. Because sometimes when we wrap up after that first session, it looks fantastic. You're like, oh, I could never see the existing tattoo here. It turned out really well. And then it heals and everything settles, and you may see a line here or there. Don't panic, just get in touch with your artist because I feel like that's not uncommon. And a lot of times it is a 10 or 15-minute fix, and then you are back out the door and it looks great. And, you know, so if you go through that process and you still see a little bit, don't worry. Email your artist or drop in. Um, it also may, we talked about that it may be larger than you expected. It may also be more expensive than you expected. So even if, let's go back to that mermaid example, if you had that mermaid piece, quoted somewhere else on the body that wasn't a cover up, and now you've decided that you want to use that for a cover up, don't be surprised if that is more expensive because there is a lot of problem solving that we are doing as we're tattooing. There may need to be some changes on the spot as far as the way that I'm shading those rocks or highlighting them. And that could extend the time of that tattoo as far as like, if we tattooed it just it's not a cover up, that might go pretty quick. But with the additional time to problem solve, you could end up with an extra hour on top of your tattoo time, just possibly. So do expect that you may spend a little more than what you've spent on your other tattoos because there could also be a lot of planning for that artist beforehand, before your appointment, where they need to do a few drafts and figure things out before you even come in. And, you know, you're going to have to pay them for their time to do that. So keep your budget in mind. Um, I think those are most of the topics that I wanted to cover as far as this basic cover up video. If there's anything further that you would like to know or I missed anything, please let me know. I would definitely be up for making a cover up part two or a more technical video about this. So I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next week for the next one. Bye.